That pool is HOA approved, and you have no right to touch it.
It's sitting 4 feet inside my property line,
I said. She didn't blink.
The HOA approved this last spring. That variance overrides your survey. You don't get a vote.
All right.
I said.
Touch that pool and I file a line on your house. Code enforcement will be here by noon, and every homeowner on this street will hear about this. The HOA controls what gets built here, not you.
She photographed my fence post.
Nothing goes up within 30 feet of my pool. Not a structure, not a fence, not a single board. You understand me? Nothing.
She had no idea I still had the original boundary survey from 1987. 3 neighbors watched from their driveways. None of them said a word. She had no idea what she'd just given me permission to prove. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 62 years old. I bought the lot at the end of Sycamore Crest Drive in the spring of 1989, 1.3 acres at the outer edge of a suburb that hadn't quite decided whether it wanted to be a neighborhood or a development. The back lots had room. Mine had a strip of old grass running along the eastern edge where the land dipped slightly before flattening out toward the neighboring properties. The HOA, when I bought in, was a 2-page document in a manila envelope. Reasonable rules maintain your lawn. Don't paint your house a color that requires sunglasses, no commercial vehicles in the driveway overnight. I signed it and went back to moving boxes. For 35 years, nothing interesting happened on this lot. Good neighbors, quiet summers. I maintained what was mine. Then Karen Whitfield was elected HOA president. I'll tell you more about Karen's 4 years in office in a moment. What I'll say now is that by the time the pool went up, she had already fined 11 homeowners on our street for offenses I wouldn't have thought to write down, let alone charge money for. The pool didn't appear overnight. It started with a newsletter item proposed community recreation enhancement and a board vote at a March meeting I didn't attend because I didn't think it involved my land. By the time I understood what was being built and where the excavation equipment had already crossed my fence line. That fence post matters, let me be exact about it. The strip of land between Karen's backyard and mine was my property, not HOA common ground, not a shared buffer. Recorded as mine in the original 1987 county plat filed before this subdivision had sold a single lot, and still mine on every deed record, every tax document, every county filing that existed. I sank that post in 1997 using those exact 1987 coordinates. It marked the eastern boundary of my land. The pool's northwest corner sat 4 feet and 2 inches past that post, on my side. I measured it myself the morning I noticed. Then I hired a licensed county surveyor, no HOA affiliation, to run a formal boundary assessment. He pulled the 1987 plat from county records, cross-referenced the deed markers, and gave me written findings: 4.2 feet of encroachment. Concrete already cured, tile already grouted, diving board already bolted to its platform. I sent the HOA a certified letter. Calm, factual, no threats. Documented the encroachment, attached the surveyor's preliminary report, requested the board halt further work pending an independent boundary review. Kept a copy of everything. Karen's response was the conversation I just described. She came to my side of that fence post, not her property. Mine stood 3 feet inside my line in resort sandals and told me a board vote in March had superseded a county recorded plat from 1987. Then she photographed my fence post. Then she told me nothing would ever be built within 30 feet of her pool. I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. I went inside, opened the second drawer of my filing cabinet, and found the original 1987 survey in the plastic sleeve where it had been for 20 years. County stamp in the corner, property boundaries in red ink, my lot number in the upper right. I set it on the kitchen table and looked at it. Then I looked out the window at the pool. Genuinely impressive construction, I'll give them that. Infinity edge on Karen's side. A water feature near the steps. A diving board professional-grade fiberglass deck concrete platform sitting 9 feet and 4 inches from my fence post. The tile was the color of a Caribbean brochure. $90,000 of construction minimum. Probably more. All of it 4 feet inside the wrong person's property. 3 of my neighbors had watched Karen threaten me that morning from the relative safety of their driveways. I recognized the careful blankness on their faces. They knew what she was capable of. They'd been through her apparatus fines, formal letters, lien threats for things so small they'd be embarrassing to name in a courtroom. They paid because fighting cost more than folding. I had made the same calculation more than once, but Karen Whitfield had just walked 4 feet onto my land, told me an HOA variance outranked a recorded deed, and declared that nothing would ever rise within 30 feet of her diving board. She had no idea what she'd just given me permission to build. To understand what happened, you need to understand what Sycamore Crest Drive looked like before Karen Whitfield became president. It was a quiet street, 38 houses on a long cul-de-sac that dead-ended near the tree line, older subdivision, the kind built before HOAs developed a taste for enforcement. Most of us had been here 20 years or more. We knew each other's dogs by name. Nobody bothered anyone. The original HOA documents, the ones from 1987, were 2 pages and a signature block. They covered 3 things: lawn maintenance, exterior paint approval, and a noise ordinance that nobody had ever actually invoked. The annual fee was $180. There had never been a fine issued in the history of the association. The previous president, a retired engineer named Hal Bremer, ran the thing with the energy of someone managing a suggestion box. He held 1 meeting a year, approved the budget, and left people alone. Hal moved to Scottsdale in 2020. Karen Whitfield was elected to replace him by 9 votes. Turnout was low because nobody thought it mattered. It mattered. Within 60 days of taking office, Karen had drafted and circulated a 7-page addendum to the original HOA covenants. New enforcement powers, a formal fine schedule, a compliance committee chaired by herself. The annual fee went from $180 to $540. She called it a modernization. Nobody voted on the addendum. She sent it as a notice. The fines started within the first year. They were small, at first $75 for a cracked driveway apron on the Liu property, $125 for a mailbox post that measured 2 inches taller than the new standard, a $200 notice to the Kellermans for a garden shed that had been standing in their backyard for 11 years without anyone saying a word. People paid because it was easier than not paying. Then the amounts grew. Margaret Chen had lived on Sycamore Crest for 23 years. She was 74 years old. She had a wind chime on her porch, a simple copper one, the kind you get at a garden store. Karen cited it as a noise violation under her new addendum. Mrs. Chen wrote a letter to the board explaining that the chime had been there for 6 years and had never generated a single complaint from any neighbor. Karen responded with an escalating fine notice. By the time it was resolved, Mrs. Chen had paid $3,400 to avoid the lien threat. $3,400 for a wind chime. The Garcias were younger, early 30s, 2 kids. They had a basketball hoop at the end of their driveway. Regulation. Freestanding, not cemented. Marco Garcia offered to move it to the side when guests came through. Karen sent them a formal lien warning on a Thursday. They removed the hoop by Saturday morning and paid the $600 outstanding fine. Their older kid, who was 11, had been using that hoop every afternoon after school. I knew both stories because Mrs. Chen had mentioned it in passing at the mail cluster one morning. In the careful, quiet way people mention things when they've been humiliated and aren't quite sure they're allowed to be angry about it. The Garcias I heard about from my own observations. I watched Marco take the hoop apart with a socket wrench while his kids sat on the front steps and didn't say anything. This is the environment Karen Whitfield had spent 4 years building. A neighborhood where people paid what they were told, kept their heads down, and hoped they weren't next. It worked because she was methodical. She didn't come after everyone at once. She went one household at a time, year by year, establishing what the penalty for resistance looked like. By the time she got to the pool project, most of the street had already been processed through her apparatus at least once. The pool proposal came in February. It appeared in the HOA newsletter as a community enhancement initiative, a resort-style recreational facility for the cul-de-sac financed through a special assessment and HOA reserve funds. The newsletter called it a shared investment in our collective home values. What it did not say was where exactly the pool would be built. The board voted on it at the March meeting. I didn't attend. I had no reason to attend. I'd gone to exactly 1 HOA meeting in 35 years, and nothing that affected me had ever come up. The vote passed 4-0. All 4 board members were Karen's appointments from the previous 2 years. The variance she'd filed with the county listed the construction location as HOA Common Area Eastern Buffer. There was no independent survey commissioned, no boundary assessment ordered. The contractor, a company Karen had used for her own backyard renovation 2 years prior, broke ground in April. I noticed the excavation equipment on a Wednesday morning in late April. Noticed because the sound was wrong, too close, coming from the wrong direction for a neighboring build. I walked out back. The mini excavator's track marks crossed my fence line by a clear margin. I paced it off with my own feet first. Then I pulled a measuring tape from the garage and did it properly. The northwest corner of the excavated pool foundation was 4 feet inside my property line. 4 feet past the post I'd set in 1997 using the original 1987 county plat coordinates. That night, I opened the second drawer of my filing cabinet and found the survey in its plastic sleeve. county stamp, red boundary lines, my lot number, the dimensions exactly as I remembered them. I laid it on the kitchen table. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was something quieter than anger, a kind of settling, like a decision being made below the level of conscious thought. I looked at that survey for a long time before I went to bed. Karen had built her apparatus on the assumption that everyone on this street had a threshold, a price at which it became easier to fold than to fight. She had just found out where mine wasn't. The morning after I found the 1987 survey, I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote a letter. Not an angry letter, not a threat. A formal, factual, certified letter to the HOA board of Sycamore Crest Drive documenting a single observation: the northwest corner of the pool under construction at the eastern buffer strip encroached approximately 4 feet into my property as defined by the original 1987 county plat lot, number 14A. I requested the board halt further construction pending an independent boundary review. I attached a photocopy of the relevant section of the plat. I signed it, dated it, and sent it certified mail to the HOA's registered address, which as of Karen's tenure was her own house. I kept a copy of everything. I have always kept copies of everything. The response came back in 11 days. It was a single page on HOA letterhead signed by all 4 board members. The language was Karen's. I recognized the rhythm of it. It described my claim as frivolous and without merit. It stated that the HOA variance approved at the March board meeting superseded any private deed interpretation or historical survey. It said that any interference with HOA improvement projects constituted a violation of the association's governing documents. Then came the number that was meant to end the conversation: $500 per day. That was the fine they were threatening if I interfered with, obstructed, or took any adverse action against the pool construction. They had decided that a certified letter documenting a property line violation constituted interference. The letter warned that continued pursuit of the claim would result in immediate lien proceedings against my property. I read it twice, then I put it in a folder, wrote the date on the tab, and set the folder on the shelf next to the 1987 survey. 2 days later, Karen came to my driveway. She didn't come alone. She brought Richard Oates, the HOA vice president, a soft-spoken man who had been on the board for 18 months and whose primary qualification appeared to be that he never disagreed with Karen in public. He stood slightly behind her and to the left, like a second at a duel. "I need you to understand something," Karen said. She was standing at the edge of my driveway, not quite on my property this time. "Learning, maybe? What you did with that certified letter, that's harassment of an elected board. We can pursue that." "I documented a property line encroachment," I said. "That's not harassment, that's correspondence. The variance covers that land. The variance covers what the board believes is HOA common area," I said. "Whether that belief is accurate is exactly what I'm asking to have assessed." She looked at Richard. He looked at his shoes. "You can lawyer up all you want," she said. "The HOA has been here 20 years. You're one man with a piece of paper from the 80s. I didn't respond to that. There wasn't anything useful to say to it. She held up the copy of my certified letter. She'd brought it with her, which I noted and tapped it against her palm once, the way people do when they want to appear decisive. "This stops here. The pool is finished in 3 weeks. After that, you're welcome to feel however you want about it. But if I receive one more letter, one more call to any county office, one more anything from you about this pool, the fine clock starts that day." Richard cleared his throat softly. "Oates' specialty." "Understood," I said. Karen studied me for a moment. She was looking for something in my face. Capitulation, probably, or at least the beginning of it. I kept my expression neutral because that wasn't what was there. They left. I watched them walk back up the street, Karen's stride brisk and satisfied, Richard half a step behind. I went inside and called a land surveyor. Not the HOA's people. A licensed county certified surveyor named David Prescott, who had been doing boundary assessments in this county for 27 years and had no relationship with any HOA in the jurisdiction. I explained the situation in plain terms. I had a property dispute involving a pool construction. I had the original 1987 plat, and I needed an independent boundary assessment using county records as the primary source. He scheduled the appointment for the following Thursday. Prescott arrived with 2 assistants and a total station instrument, the kind of equipment that doesn't estimate and doesn't approximate. They spent 4 hours on my lot establishing all 4 corners using the 1987 plat coordinates cross-referenced against county benchmark data. Professional, quiet, methodical. A few neighbors saw them from their windows. Nobody came over. Karen saw them too. I didn't know this for certain until later, but her kitchen window faced the eastern side of her property, the side where the pool was, and the survey crew worked within clear sightlines of that window for most of the afternoon. I imagine she watched. I imagine she thought about what it meant. I didn't ask Prescott for his findings at the end of the day. He said he'd have the written report in 10 business days. I thanked him and wrote the check. While I waited, the pool construction finished. The tile work went in Caribbean blue exactly as I'd first noticed. The deck furniture appeared one Saturday, 4 loungers, an umbrella, a small side table. The diving board was installed on a Tuesday, bolted to a concrete platform. The pool was filled. From my kitchen window that evening, the water caught the late sun and threw small ribbons of light across Karen's fence. It was objectively a beautiful pool, 4 feet inside my property line. 2 weeks later, the county surveyor drove a stake into my yard. It landed exactly where I knew it would. David Prescott's written report arrived on a Tuesday in a standard business envelope with the county surveyor's seal in the upper left corner. I opened it at the kitchen table, poured a cup of coffee first, sat down. 4.2 feet. That was the confirmed encroachment at the pool's northwest corner. Not approximate, not estimated. 4.2 feet of concrete pool structure sitting on my property, established by county benchmark data and the 1987 plat certified by a licensed independent surveyor with 27 years of boundary work in this jurisdiction. I set the report next to the 1987 survey, lined them up so the property lines were parallel. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Patricia Weller, property and real estate law, 15 years in practice, an office 20 minutes from Sycamore Crest. I'd used her once before, years ago, for a title question when I refinanced. She was direct and did not bill by the word. I described the situation. She asked 2 questions. Did I have the original plat? Did I have Prescott's report? I said yes to both. She told me to bring everything in. We met 2 days later. I laid the documents on her conference table in the order I'd collected them: the 1987 survey, Prescott's report, the HOA's variance approval, and their written response dismissing my certified letter. Weller read through the variance document for about 4 minutes without saying anything. Then she put it down and looked at me. They never commissioned a survey, she said. Correct. The variance approves construction on what the board characterized as HOA common area. But there's no independent boundary assessment in here, no plat reference, no lot number verification. She tapped the document. A variance can authorize a deviation from zoning rules. It cannot override a recorded deed or plat. Those are different instruments entirely. This variance has no legal standing as a property claim. 1 sentence of law, 1 sentence of what it meant: the pool had been built on my land with no valid legal authority behind it. None. I did not call Karen. I did not contact the board. I went home, opened a yellow legal pad, and started a list. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door on a Thursday evening, 11 days after Prescott's report arrived. She was carrying a manila envelope, and she held it with both hands, the way you carry something you've been deciding whether to carry for a long time. I heard you had surveyors out, she said. She was small and careful in the way of someone who had learned to be careful. The Lees mentioned it. Come in, I said. We sat at the kitchen table. She put the envelope down between us and looked at it for a moment before she spoke. She told me about the wind chime, though I'd already heard the outline of it in more detail than I'd known before. The letters, the escalating notices, the final amount, the way Karen had called it a community standards compliance action in the paperwork, as though giving something an official name changed what it was. Then she slid the envelope across the table. Inside were the original HOA fine notices, every one of them in chronological order, paper-clipped by month. $3,400 documented in Karen's own letterhead across 17 separate notices spanning 8 months. I kept everything, Mrs. Chen said. I didn't know why, I just did. I added her documents to my file and wrote her name at the top of the legal pad. Marco Garcia came by 2 days later, a Saturday morning, while his kids were at a soccer game. He sat down, put his hands flat on the table, and told me what happened in the same tone you'd use to describe a car. Repair the particular flatness of someone who has processed the anger, and what's left is just the facts. He'd kept his documents, too. Fine notices, the formal lien warning letter, the payment confirmation. $600 and a lien threat for a freestanding basketball hoop that his son had used every afternoon. I added the Garcias to the list. What I had now sitting in a manila folder on my kitchen shelf was this Prescott survey confirming 4.2 feet of encroachment, the 1987 plat, Weller's written memo on the variance flaw, Mrs. Chen's 17 fine notices, the Garcias' lien documentation, a growing list of names. There was one more thing I needed to check. I drove to the county building department on a Monday morning and requested the construction permit Karen's contractor had filed for the pool. The clerk pulled it up on the system and printed the document. I read it standing at the counter. The permit had been filed under HOA Common Area Construction. Standard enough. but the parcel ID field, the number identifying which specific lot the construction was occurring on, listed a number I recognized immediately. It was mine. Lot 14A, my parcel number. Not HOA common land, not a shared buffer zone. The permit had been filed by Karen's contractor against my lot. Whether it was a clerical error or something sloppier than that, the effect was the same. The pool was not only built on my property, it had been permitted against my property. The county's own records said so. I added the permit copy to the folder. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and pulled up the county zoning code. My lot, 1.3 acres, original agricultural designation from the 1987 plat, fell under a residential agricultural classification that the county had never reclassified. I scrolled through the permitted structures section. Agricultural utility structures. Permitted on residential agricultural parcels of 1 acre or greater. Minimum setback from property line 5 feet. I read that sentence twice. Then I closed the laptop and looked out the window at the pool, still in blue in the evening light, its diving board casting a long shadow across the deck. I picked up the legal pad and turned to a fresh page. The lien notice arrived on a Friday. Standard envelope, HOA letterhead. Karen's signature at the bottom alongside all 4 board members. I read it standing at the mailbox. The HOA was formally filing a lien against my property lot, 14A Sycamore Crest Drive, for $7,500 in what the document called obstruction fees. The stated basis I had willfully delayed the completion of an HOA-approved community improvement project by commissioning an unauthorized survey and engaging legal counsel in bad faith against the association. I read that phrase twice. Obstruction fees. I had sent a certified letter and hired a licensed surveyor. Those were the obstruction offenses. I went inside and called Patricia Weller. She picked up on the second ring. I read her the relevant paragraph. There was a short pause. There's no bylaw basis for that fee category, she said. I've read their governing documents. Obstruction fees don't exist in their covenant structure. They invented this. Can they file it anyway? They can file it. Filing a lien doesn't require it to be valid. It just requires them to submit the paperwork and pay the county fee. The lien creates a cloud on your title. You can't sell, you can't refinance, you can't take out a home equity line while it's active without disclosing it. How long to challenge it? Months, she said. Possibly longer if they contest. It costs money on both sides. That's the point. I thanked her, hung up, and sat down at the kitchen table. This was the calculation Karen had made from the beginning, refined now that she knew I wasn't going to fold quietly. She couldn't stop me from having the survey done. She couldn't make Prescott's findings disappear. But she could make the process of being right as expensive and slow as possible, and she could make sure everyone on the street saw what happened to people who pushed back. That same week, 2 other homeowners received letters. I heard about them separately, one from a neighbor named Bill Sutter, who'd mentioned an unresolved fence dispute with the HOA from the previous year, and one from the Pattersons 2 doors down, who had recently installed a garden arbor without submitting a design approval form. Neither letter was a formal lien. They were warnings. A reminder sent precisely when the street was watching to see what would happen with my situation. Karen was running a consolidated campaign. She was telling Sycamore Crest what resistance cost. I added Sutter's and Patterson's letters to my file with their permission dated and labeled. Then I did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I walked the property. I started at the back corner near the tree line and walked the eastern edge slowly, the way I had 35 years ago when I first marked the boundaries after buying the lot. The grass was longer than I usually kept it on this side. I hadn't been paying much attention to the eastern strip since the pool went in. I walked until I reached my fence post. From the post, I looked at the pool, then at the diving board platform, the concrete base, the fiberglass board extending over the water. I pulled the measuring tape from my jacket pocket and stretched it from the post to the nearest edge of the diving board platform. 9 feet 4 inches. I held that number for a moment. My property line sat at the post. My legal setback for agricultural utility structures was 5 feet from that line, meaning I had the right to build any county-permitted agricultural structure starting 5 feet and 1 inch from where I was standing. 5 feet 1 inch from my line put a structure at 4 feet 3 inches from Karen's diving board. I measured it again, same number. I went inside and opened my laptop. The county agricultural code for residential agricultural parcels above 1 acre was not difficult to find. I had read it once already the night I discovered the zoning classification. Now I read it more carefully, section by section. Permitted structures included storage facilities, equipment sheds, irrigation infrastructure, and listed without ceremony between composting guidelines and livestock enclosure regulations, commercial-grade manure and agricultural waste processing facilities. Permitted, on parcels of 1 acre or greater, minimum setback 5 feet from the recorded property line. My lot 1.3 acres. Agricultural designation unchanged since 1987. I researched the construction requirements. Concrete foundation. Ventilation compliance. Standard commercial specifications available from 3 contractors within 40 minutes of my house. I priced it roughly. Not cheap, not prohibitive. Within reach of a man who had owned his property outright for 11 years and had no outstanding liens on his title, not yet anyway. I closed the laptop. I thought about the pool, the infinity edge, the Caribbean tile, the diving board 9 feet and 4 inches from my fence post. I thought about Karen's voice the morning she stood on my property and told me nothing would ever be built within 30 feet of her pool. I thought about the word nothing. I pulled out the legal pad, turned to a fresh page, and started making calculations. Dimensions, setback confirmations, contractor contacts, county permit requirements. I wrote without stopping for about 40 minutes. When I finished, I set the pen down and looked at what I'd written. The plan was complete. It had been complete, I realized, since the moment I read the agricultural zoning code that first evening. I'd just been letting it become certain. On a Tuesday morning, while Karen was hosting a pool party for the board, I could hear the music from my backyard. Something with a bass line and the sound of people who believed they had won. Laughing in the afternoon heat, I drove to the county building department and filed a permit application for an agricultural composting structure. The woman at the desk read the description, looked at the dimensions, looked at the parcel ID, and then looked up at me. "You sure about this?" she said. I told her I was. The meeting notice went out on a Wednesday. Every homeowner on Sycamore Crest Drive received it paper copy in the mailbox, email copy to the HOA distribution list. Emergency General Assembly. Saturday 2 o'clock, the Whitfield residence. Attendance strongly encouraged. The subject line read, "Protecting our community investment." I recognized the language immediately. Karen was not calling a meeting to resolve a dispute. She was calling a meeting to establish a record, to put 96 homeowners in a room and make them witnesses to the outcome she had already decided. I pressed my shirt and went. Karen had rearranged her living room to accommodate the crowd. Folding chairs in rows, a portable projector screen at the far end, a table up front where the board sat in a line. She was already standing when I arrived. She had dressed for it something between business casual and authority, the kind of outfit that communicates I run things here without saying it out loud. The room filled quickly. I counted roughly 70 people before I stopped counting. Some were Karen's loyalists, the ones who attended every meeting and voted reliably with the board. Others were homeowners I'd rarely seen at any HOA function, people who'd come because the notice said emergency and they were worried about their property values. A few I recognized as people who'd received Karen's fine notices over the years. They sat near the back. I sat in the middle. Karen opened without preamble. She thanked everyone for coming, acknowledged that a small disagreement had arisen regarding the new community pool, and then spent the next 12 minutes presenting the pool as though it were the Apollo program. Photographs, professional ones taken by whoever had done the deck furniture Instagram post, showed the finished pool from every angle. The infinity edge, the water feature, the Caribbean tile catching afternoon light, the diving board platform. She put the cost breakdown on the projector screen. $140,000. HOA reserve funds and the special assessment divided across the association less than $1,500 per household. She described it as the single largest investment in the community's history and said that the pool had already increased assessed property values in comparable subdivisions by 4 to 7%. She paused to let that land. Several people applauded. Then she explained the situation with my property claim using that phrase, property claim, the way you'd use unfounded allegation, and described my certified letter and survey as an attempt by one homeowner to unilaterally reverse a properly approved community decision. She said the HOA had consulted legal counsel and was confident in their position. That was my cue. I raised my hand. She gave me the floor with the particular graciousness of someone who believes they've already won. I stood and laid 3 documents on the table in front of the board. Prescott's survey report, the original 1987 plat with the boundary lines marked in red, and Patricia Weller's written memo on the variance. I described each one in 2 sentences. I did not raise my voice. I said that the pool's northwest corner encroached 4.2 feet into my property as documented by an independent county certified surveyor, and that the HOA variance, while valid as a zoning instrument, had no legal standing as a property claim because no independent boundary assessment had ever been commissioned. That was it. I sat down. Karen's attorney was a man named Gerald Fossey, late 50s, the kind of lawyer who has spent his career in HOA work because the clients are reliable and the opposition is usually unrepresented. He stood from his chair at the side of the room and addressed the crowd rather than me. "Private surveys don't override HOA land use agreements," he said with the tone of someone explaining something obvious. "The variance approved by this board in March represents a binding land use determination. Mr. Calloway's survey reflects his interpretation of a historical document. The variance stands." He sat back down. 3 rows ahead of me, a man I didn't know said exactly under his breath and nodded. Someone near the window said that this had already gone through the proper channels. A woman to my left, one of Karen's regulars, turned and looked at me with an expression that said she found my presence here vaguely inconsiderate. Several homeowners had questions for Fossey. He answered them smoothly. He used the phrase "proper legal channels" 4 times in 8 minutes. Each time he said it, he made my survey and my attorney's memo feel like a minor bureaucratic inconvenience rather than a documented property encroachment. I did not respond. I did not interrupt. I watched people nodding. Near the back of the room, Mrs. Chen sat very still in a folding chair with her hands folded in her lap. She caught my eye once. She gave me a small, careful nod, barely a movement at all, the kind of gesture that means, "I see you, and I'm still here and nothing else." I noted it. Then I looked back at the front of the room. Karen closed the meeting by announcing that the pool would officially open the following Saturday. She invited the neighborhood. She said she hoped this could be a moment of coming together after a difficult few weeks. More applause. Karen smiled. I left without further comment. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a speech. I walked out into the Saturday afternoon, got in my car, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. In my jacket's inside pocket was a folded document I had not mentioned once during the meeting. I hadn't planned to mention it. There was no reason to mention it yet. The county building permit for 1 agricultural composting structure lot. 14A Sycamore Crest Drive had been approved 3 days earlier. The approval stamp was dated. The parcel was mine. The setback was confirmed at 5 feet from the recorded property line. Construction was scheduled for Monday. The construction crew arrived at 7 Monday morning. 2 trucks. A flatbed carrying rebar concrete forms and materials I'd sourced from a contractor in the next county. A mini excavator on a trailer that took 15 minutes to unload in my driveway while the foreman walked the property with the permit and a measuring tape. They knew exactly where to set up because I had sent them Prescott's survey report and the coordinates of the property line stake. Prescott's crew had driven the stake the previous Thursday. Fresh orange planted 6 inches from my fence post at the exact boundary coordinates of the 1987 plat. From that stake to the edge of the planned structure, 5 feet and 1 inch. My land. County permit in hand. Not a single inch of it negotiable. I heard Karen's back door open at 7:23. She stood at the edge of her pool deck and looked at the trucks, at the trailer, at the excavator being unloaded. I watched from my back porch. I saw the exact moment she understood what she was looking at. A long pause, and then her posture changed the way a person's posture changes when something they assumed was theoretical becomes real. She came around the fence line at a pace just below running. "You cannot build that here." She stopped at the property boundary. She'd learned enough to stay on her side and pointed at the equipment. "I told you, nothing within 30 feet of this pool. I said it to your face." I was already walking to the fence post. I set 2 documents on top of it. The county building permit for 1 agricultural composting structure, Lot 14A, approved and stamped 3 days before the Saturday meeting. And the 1987 survey, the property boundary in red ink, my lot number in the upper right corner. I set them side by side where she could read both. "My line," I said. "My structure, county approved. Setback is 5 feet. We're at 5 feet 1 inch. She looked at the permit, at the survey, at the orange stake beside the post. Her jaw moved, but nothing came out for a moment. "You can't put a composting facility next to a residential pool," she said. "That's a health violation." "You're welcome to call the county," I said. She called Gerald Fossey instead. Speaker on. I could hear the quality of the call go open, the faint ambient sound of his office. She described the situation, quickly equipment, my yard composting structure 5 feet from her pool. "What's the parcel ID on their permit?" Fossey said. I held the permit toward her. She read the number into the phone. Silence on the line. That parcel ID is of the homeowner's lot. Fosse's voice had changed. The Saturday meeting confidence was gone. 14A, that's not HOA common area. Gerald, I know that, but our construction permit, the one filed in April, what parcel ID did your contractor use? Karen said nothing. I'm pulling county records right now. Keys on a keyboard through the speaker, then silence, the kind where you can hear someone on the other end choosing their next words very carefully. Our pool permit was filed against lot 14A. Karen lowered the phone slightly. His lot, Fosse said, measured. Each word separated from the next. We built on his lot, we permitted against his lot, and the variance we relied on contains no independent boundary survey. A pause. The variance doesn't hold, Karen. We have a problem. She lowered the phone the rest of the way. She stood looking at the orange stake at the permit on the fence post at the crew who had not stopped working throughout the entire call. The mini excavator idled somewhere behind me. And then the neighbors started coming out. Mrs. Chen came first. She came from 2 houses down with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a woman who had thought about this moment for longer than I knew. She crossed to the edge of my property and stood just inside the line with her hands at her sides. She didn't announce herself. She didn't say anything to Karen. She just stood there with the particular stillness of someone who has already said everything she's going to say about a situation and is now simply waiting for the record to catch up. Marco Garcia came next, his wife beside him. Their older son was with them, the boy who'd sat on the front steps watching his father take the basketball hoop apart with a socket wrench the Saturday Karen's lien notice arrived. He was 12 years old and he stood straight and said nothing. Marco positioned himself near Mrs. Chen without a word. Bill Sutter came from the side fence. Patricia Reeves from the far end of the cul-de-sac. 2 of the homeowners who'd nodded at Saturday's meeting when Fosse said the variance stands, they were not nodding now. They were standing in the July heat, watching the concrete crew set forms and watching Karen. A woman named Diana, 2 doors down from Mrs. Chen, had her phone up and was recording. Karen looked at the semicircle that had formed around her. She looked at Mrs. Chen, who had paid $3,400 because a copper wind chime made a gentle sound in an evening breeze. At Marco Garcia, who had written a check for $600 and taken a hoop apart while his kids watched because it was easier than what Karen would do if he didn't. At Bill Sutter, who dropped a fence dispute because fighting cost more than a fence. She looked at Diana's phone. She looked at me. "This isn't over," she said. "The permit is filed," I said. "The structure is county approved, but you're welcome to call them." Richard Oates had appeared at Karen's back fence line at some point during the phone call. He was standing there watching long enough to see the semicircle of neighbors, long enough to see Diana's phone, long enough to understand what he was looking at. Then he turned and walked back inside without speaking. Karen watched him go. She said nothing. The crew worked through the afternoon without interruption. Foundation forms set and leveled by noon, concrete poured at 2, the ventilation framing went up in the mid-afternoon county code, required it the contractor had built it into the permit specs. By 5 o'clock, when the trucks left, the foundation was cured and the structure's location was permanent. 5 feet 1 inch from my property line, 4 feet 3 inches from Karen's diving board platform. The pool sat beyond the fence in the evening light, Caribbean tile, infinity edge water, still and blue, catching the last of the sun exactly as it had the day they filled it. $140,000 of construction, every inch of it professionally done. In a Virginia July, immediately downwind of a commercial composting facility, it was also completely unusable. Karen's back porch light came on sometime after sunset. She did not come outside. The county's encroachment notice arrived 6 weeks after the foundation was poured. It came addressed to the HOA formal document County Planning Department seal, and a copy was sent to Patricia Weller's office as the attorney of record for the property dispute. She called me the morning she received it. "It's official," she said. "The county reviewed Prescott's survey, the permit filing records, and the parcel ID on the pool's construction permit. They've confirmed the encroachment at 4.2 feet. The HOA has 90 days to remedy." What does remedy mean? 2 options. They purchase a permanent easement from you at fair market value for the encroaching portion, or they remove the pool structure from your property line. She let that sit for a moment. Gerald Fosse has already sent a letter to the HOA board confirming that the variance document carries no legal weight as a property override. He put it in writing. He had to his own notes from that Monday phone call were discoverable. I thanked her and hung up. The fabricated lien, $7,500 in invented obstruction fees, was withdrawn 4 days later. No negotiation, no counter-proposal. Karen's board filed the withdrawal paperwork with the county clerk on a Thursday afternoon. The cloud on my title was gone by end of business. I checked the county records online that evening just to see the entry removed. 35 years of clean title. Back to what it had always been. Patricia Weller sent the HOA a counter letter the following week formally documenting the lien as having been filed without bylaw basis. She didn't request any action. She just put it on the record because that's where things like that belong. The HOA board met twice in the weeks that followed. I wasn't there for either meeting. What I know about them, I learned later in pieces from people who were. The second meeting, an emergency session called by 7 homeowners invoking the association's petition clause, resulted in a vote to hold new elections. Karen lost the presidency 71-25. The new board was chaired by a woman named Sandra Keene, who had lived on Sycamore Crest for 12 years and had never been to an HOA meeting until the summer of the pool. Her first official act was to commission a legal review of every fine issued during Karen's 4-year tenure. Fines that could not be tied to a specific bylaw violation, which turned out to be most of them were retroactively voided. Within 60 days, the HOA sent reimbursement checks to 11 households. Mrs. Chen received $3,400. She called me when it arrived. I don't think she called to report it. I think she called because she'd been holding the feeling for a few days and needed somewhere to put it. We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Her wind chime was back on the porch. She'd put it up the week after the election. She said it sounded the same as it always had. Marco Garcia got their $600 back. He called me on a Saturday and I could hear his kids in the background. They'd gotten a new basketball hoop regulation freestanding. Different brand than the original. Taller backboard. The HOA's financial exposure didn't end with the reimbursements. Mrs. Chen filed a small claims action against the HOA for the original fines plus costs. The Garcias filed separately. Karen's homeowner's insurance, when she asked them to cover the board's actions during her tenure, declined on the grounds that the HOA had operated outside its documented governing authority. The insurance company's letter used the phrase unauthorized enforcement activity twice on a single page. I know this because Patricia Weller told me, and she knows these things because people in her line of work talk to each other. The easement negotiation took 8 weeks. The HOA's new board didn't contest the fair market assessment they couldn't given the documented record. They paid $18,500 for the permanent easement covering the 4.2-foot encroachment at the pool's northwest corner. The money came from the HOA reserve fund, the same fund Karen had used to build the pool. I accepted the payment, had Weller draft the easement agreement, and signed it on a Tuesday morning at her conference table. The pool stays. The boundary is on record. Every future owner of every property on Sycamore Crest Drive will know where the line is because now it's documented in 2 layers of county record instead of 1. I left the composting structure in place through the summer. Not as a statement, or not only as a statement, it was county permitted, properly built, and the permit ran through the fiscal year. I had no legal obligation to remove it, and I didn't. In October, when the HOA had paid the easement and the elections were settled, and the air had shifted to the kind of cool that makes Virginia fall feel like an apology for August, I called the contractor and had it taken down. Clean removal. Site restored. They were done in an afternoon. The pool sat there after they left Caribbean tile still and blue, the diving board extending over the water in the thin October light. It looked exactly as it had the day they filled it. It looked the way it always had. It just sat on the right side of the property line now. Everything costs something. That evening I walked the eastern edge of the lot the way I'd been walking it for 35 years. The grass was growing back on the foundation site. In another season, you wouldn't know anything had been there. I stopped at the fence post. The Orange County survey stake was still there 6 inches from the post, exactly where Prescott's crew had driven it. The county records didn't require its removal. It would stay until weather or time took it a small bright marker of where the line was and had always been. I set my coffee mug on top of the fence post and looked at the pool. Still, blue, empty this time of year. Mine on one side, hers on the other, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. I picked up the mug, walked back inside, and pulled the 1987 survey from its plastic sleeve in the second drawer. I'd had a copy made weeks earlier, color scan, archival quality. The original went back into the sleeve and back into the drawer, same as it had been since 1989. The copy I had framed. She built a resort pool on my land, so I built a manure pit next to her diving board. The county did the rest.